Hello. Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second panel, which has name The War in Ukraine and its Global Impact. And I would like to welcome distinguished speakers. First of all, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal, my friend João Gomes Cravinho. Also, I would like to welcome Maiko Ichihara, professor of Hitotsubashi University and a member of the program committee of the Forum 2000. I would also welcome Luis Almagro, General Secretary of the Organization of American States, and Emmanuel Gyimah-Boadi, the founder and the leader of Africa Barometer, very important institution. So thank you and welcome here in Prague. We are living in a strange world. Things are happening, and a lot of things is happening. The impacts of Russian aggression against Ukraine are felt across the whole world. The EU is facing massive and treacherous Russian propaganda campaign in the global south, using criticism of the West. I give you a few examples: colonization, unjust world order under Western hegemony, and calls for new world order. And those calls for new world order are clearly the call to change the current international order based on rules. And the biggest question is, what will happen? What will be the result of this, which I tend to see maybe as some kind of even global confrontation? We have tasked to intensify the joint effort of the EU countries in outreach to the so-called Global South, and not only to discuss about values and principles, but also we need to be ready to solve practical issues like food prices, energy prices, security affairs. So that leads me to my maybe broad but very first question to you. João, what will be the world after the war?
Well, that is a broad and challenging question. I think largely the response to that lies in what we do now. And now, at the moment, we're facing a very particular challenge, because over the past almost 2 years, we have been very much focused on Ukraine. And last week, we've had this conflagration in the Middle East that has grabbed our attention. And there are a couple of points, a couple of similarities that I think are worth exploring for a moment. The first one is that we, in both cases, ignored the warning signals far too long. We were not sufficiently attentive. The second point, of course, is that both of these, in different ways, are major, major threats to international order. And with respect to the first of these aspects, that we ignored the warning signals, we speak to our friends from the Baltic states, from Poland, they say, we were talking about this. But also when I speak to our Arab colleagues, they say, we were waiting for something big to happen. You know, this couldn't go on, couldn't keep on going on. So that really underlines the point very well made by President Pavel in the earlier panel, where he said, we have to tell our stories and we have to be willing to listen to the stories of the others. That will help us go part of the way. But when we do this, we cannot fall into the era of absolute relativism. If you understand, the French have an expression, tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner. If you understand everything, then you forgive everything. And that is, I think, a step way too far, because there are values that we all need to be sticking to, the values of maintaining the international order, reinforcing the international order. And when we talk to, I really don't like this expression of the global south, or the plural souths, people around the world, about the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it's pretty black and white in terms of international law, in terms of the Charter of the United Nations. It's absolutely clear, and most people understand this. What is not so black and white is why they should consider it important, why they shouldn't consider it just a European problem. That's where we have to be really strongly engaging in explaining our stories, where we're coming from, how this fits into international order, listening to stories of others, and understanding how their concerns about international order also have to be addressed. And the current situation in the Middle East is a very major challenge with respect to Ukraine, because we absolutely have to avoid the accusations of double standards. So we have to think very carefully about the positions that we adopt and be coherent with our principles.
Okay. The point is, and it was discussed in a previous panel, is it a cooperation of democratic countries, or is it a cooperation of all countries? Are we looking at solutions based on the common denominator? What is the common denominator? And the very foundation of international rules-based order is now shaking. So how do you see the future of that cooperation? Will be there some club of democracies which will be more formalized, or we will try to promote those values through the UN and the other organizations, as we were successfully trying to do so for decades? So how do you foresee that?
Thank you. Well, if I think about this international cooperation issue from Japanese perspective, I think there are both sort of positive element and also concerning element. The positive element is that there was a sort of major realization, especially in Japan and also other Asian countries as well, like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and others, that giving up Ukraine is to let those revisionist countries and revisionist authoritarian countries like Russia to change international order. So we cannot give up Ukraine. And that is for the sustenance of the international order. And we also had the big realization that, with the massive inflow of distorted narratives and disinformation from Russia, with the help of Chinese trolls in Asian societies, with this war, we realized that we also have to maintain democratic discourse and liberal international order as well. So there was this big realization. On the other hand, one concern was that, because especially at the initial stage of this war, we talked a lot, in the international society, we talked a lot about the importance of cooperation amongst democratic countries, democracies. And so it became like a frame of democracy versus autocracy. And that actually pushed a lot of global south countries away, making them feel like this seems like an ideological war. So later on, I'm aware that many countries like the US, Japan, and so forth decided not to emphasize democracy, but to emphasize more about the importance of human rights protection, or the importance of the sovereign international order and so forth. And that means that we actually weakened the discourse on democracy itself in order to orchestrate support from the global south as well. So we probably, into the future, we have to think how to maintain discourse of liberalism in the world while trying to make well, better partnership with other countries, including Global South as well.
Thank you. Democracy versus hypocrisy. It's traditional fight between what's being said and what really happens. And the West is very often being accused of hypocrisy, of using values when it's useful for West. How is West perceived in Africa right now, in African countries? Is it diverse? Is it common view? How should we understand? How should we understand this issue?
I mean, first of all, I speak not as a specialist, but as somebody who I try to keep my ears to the ground and I listen to people. Sometimes in my work, we interview people and get their opinions, not specifically on this. But first, I think we have to understand that long before the invasion of Ukraine, Africa and many Africans have seen an evolving international order different from what prevailed in the 90s and in the 2000s. And that Russia and China have been on the prowl on the continent. They are gaining increasing attention and they are attracting allies among Africans, especially among African autocrats who see a great deal of affinity between the aspirations, their desires, and those of Russia and China. But again, from the African standpoint, we should also recognize that the West voluntarily vacated the African space for much of the last almost 10 years and more, and that this vacuum has been filled by others. And so when in the wake of the Ukrainian war, the invasion, there was the expectation that Africa should vote along with the West, with G7 and others in the UN. Well, that was quite unrealistic, and you saw the outcome. I also see that within Africa, first you have to make a distinction between the leaders and the people on the street. Not all the leaders have bought into the Russia-China agenda, but on the other hand, they see an evolving international order and they see an ongoing new Cold War. They don't know what the outcome of the struggle will be, so they are hedging their bets. You see that in the way some of them talk one way and vote another way at the UN. That's for the leaders. On the African streets, when young Africans saw the way in which Ukrainians were welcomed, Ukrainian refugees, and those fleeing from the conflict were welcomed readily in the West, and then compared that to the ham-fisted way in which African security and migration issues are handled, well, they saw hypocrisy, and your word was right. And so if we were expecting solidarity from the ordinary young African on the street, you rather saw them alienated, feeling discriminated against, feeling that there's a bias against them, and feeling even more frustrated. And I think how to repair this damage is part of what we should be thinking of and dealing with when we are thinking of a new world order or restoring some sort of a liberal democratic world order.
Not an easy question to solve, but it's a huge task in front of us. What is the perception in Latin America? What is the perception of the European affairs and our calls for values and democracy, which is something where we really excel?
there is so much at stake, and we are always going to lose when there is a war in Europe. There is nothing for us to win. And this war is very important because it's a war about democracy, it's a war about principles and values, it's a war also about interest, like every war. And all Latin American countries, Caribbean countries are seeing that is quite a serious challenge for them. And they, of course, we have aligned with principles. We have to be clear that aggression is not possible and aggression is a crime. We have been clear also, we have retired the status of permanent observer of Russia from the Organization of American States. We have been clear also with resolution and declarations made under our organization related to that matter. And we still have to deal, of course, with some interest. Russia is a big country, was a big market for most of our country. Some of our countries, because of the position that they took, they have lost a lot of their trade and their markets abroad. And of course, we running into uncertainty. That was not something that we needed, especially after COVID. We are running under uncertainty of food prices, of energy prices, and of course, if the violence that exists in the world is permeating everything. It's in a continent that has a lot of violent deaths per year. But you see, we have seen that defending democracy and defending yourself is what it matters the most, and to have your house in order is what it matters the most. We have seen the conflict of the aggression, also conflict of Azerbaijan-Armenia before that. Then we saw the war of aggression of Russia to Ukraine. Then we saw the attack of Hamas to Israel. So we are seeing a world where everything is valid, where everything can be validated later. And that is also a war where you can lose a lot, especially when you have institutions that are sort of weak in many cases, economies that are not so strong in many cases, and of course an underground of violence mainly related to organized crime and drug trafficking that is very much connected to Russia and other authoritarian regimes in the world. So we have a lot to concern. Our principles are clear, our values are clear. We have expressed them, we have put them on the table, declaration and statements, resolutions, but also we have to see that any war in Europe, it affects the rest of the world, but any kind of aggressions that exist now in the world, it can bring a lot of uncertainty to our countries, especially when we have 3 clear dictatorships in our continent.
So my question is, if stakes are so high, if such values are being challenged, if the world order itself is challenged, why is there the Ukraine war fatigue? Why are people tired if it is such a important fight?
Well, Jan, I think that firstly, I'm not entirely sure that there is a fatigue. Obviously, after a year and 8 months, people want something different. That's more than reasonable. It's also the case that public opinion finds it difficult to sustain more than one crisis at a time. So now all of the focus has gone on to the situation in the Middle East. But I think that in my country, and I'm sure this is true in many other countries in Europe, there is a very strong sense that we absolutely need to support Ukraine until it achieves the strategic victory that is fundamental for all of us. At the same time, when we reach out and speak to colleagues from around the world, we realize that on their side, all they see is not the potential gains from the establishment of the re-establishment, consolidation of international law and order, what they see is the tremendous consequences in terms of their living standards. Professor Gyimah-Boadi made a very important point about the double standards with respect to the treatment of citizens. And that aspect is one that we have increasing difficulty in dealing with because we have a deficit. We have had a long time in which we have been, frankly, very excessively focused on our own internal European matters. You and I frequent the Foreign Affairs Council once a month and remember how in the beginning it was all just Ukraine, and then, wait a minute, we have to explain Ukraine to the rest of the world. And then it was, we tried to explain, but they didn't understand. I think now we've reached a point around that table of the Foreign Affairs Council where there is a much deeper understanding of what engagement with the rest of the world means, and we're seeing our colleagues going out there, dialoguing, listening. And so I think we're getting a better Europe out of this, but it's an uphill struggle, and we have no choice but to explain around the world that we need to see this through to a situation where we are not defeated in terms of our stand on international order.
Better Europe, geopolitical Europe, stronger Europe. Maybe it is there, maybe it will be there. It's our job, actually, to do so right now. But there's one big concern, and that's the rise of authoritarianism, and especially in Indo-Pacific region. How this can go into the whole mix? What is the perception of some war in Europe? You know, please solve it, calm down. You know, that's what I hear in the different words from counterparts who do not ride on the wave of international order. So, how can we understand this?
Discussion on geostrategy and geopolitical tension in the Asian region also has intensified after Russian aggression of Ukraine, and there is a greater sense that what we are facing right now is indeed authoritarian sort of erosion of international order using this geostrategic card. And well, basically, Asian countries all have strong economic trading relations with China, and so there are those, especially business sectors, who are sort of a bit concerned about cutting, economic relations with China altogether. But at the same time, there is a stronger sense that if we do not take some action sometime soon to prevent or deter China from making significant attacks, especially against Taiwan, then we will see a disastrous sort of Asia in the future. And that's definitely one thing. And so there has been sort of consensus amongst that Asian region that we have to think about how to react to China. But at the same time, most of those Southeast Asian countries, especially, do not want to, show open sort of antagonistic sort of attitude against China. And we also have to think hard as to how to appeal to domestic public, because those who are sort of anti-China in Asian countries are the hawkish ones, whereas those Democrats are more liberal and sort of accommodative to China. So, if we have to think about how to strengthen democracy while tackling this authoritarian erosion into the region, then we have to actually find a middle ground sort of narrative, not necessarily making China the only enemy, but to think about how to protect democracy.
And how to understand this new axis of evil, which goes from Tehran to Moscow to Pyongyang.
Well, I don't think there's not much discussion about this autocracy Inc. In the Asian region so far, but I see really a massive partnership of those authoritarian countries, well, in terms of especially narratives in the region. Well, as I said, Chinese trolls have been helping spread well, Russian propaganda, and also those, you know, for example, Chinese state media or private media are also orchestrated, and that actually makes it more complicated for. Actually, this is not only for Asian region, but also for whatever countries that conspiracy theorists within our societies also, you know, try to buy those narratives. And so we cannot necessarily say that, okay, this is about authoritarian countries versus us, but we also have to think really hard how to solve those issues of conspiracy theories within our societies, and also how to overcome the divide within the society as well.
I have to agree that there lies a huge responsibility for platforms which are operating, you know, speaking about Facebook, Twitter, X, you know, which enables this to happen. And this is again task, especially for the US Congress probably, to make some regulation. The EU is doing quite a lot, but we can see that those platforms in very small bubbles of different countries may play a major role. And this is something which globally we still are learning. If we move to African continent in this sense, does it make sense for us to be speaking about values and democracy? Does it make sense even to try to put into our narratives, or should we, you know, now I use that we are ministers of foreign affairs, should we be more practical oriented, make deals, you know, try to be better than China, better than Russia with their deals, not to ask those pesky questions?
So I think I can answer this question from the vantage of Afrobarometer and the findings of our surveys. We've been doing these surveys since about 1999, 2000, 24, 25 years, and there has been consistency in how much Africans say they prefer to live under governments that are democratic, accountable, and responsive. There is also consistency in their assessment of how much of this is being delivered to them and the gap that exists between expectations, aspirations versus delivery and supply. From that standpoint, I think it would be a big mistake for the West to basically abandon the promotion of democracy and good governance in Africa. It is the attraction to the ideal, to ideals of democracy and much of the Washington consensus that inspired the democratic movements in Africa in the 1990s and 2000s. Part of the disappointment and frustration today has more to do with failure to deliver. In the last survey, we asked questions about whether citizens would accept military intervention in situations where the elected incumbent government is being abusive of power and being corrupt and so on. Well, unfortunately, we got about a slight majority across the continent saying that they welcome military coup. But it also varies very sharply from country to country. So you get a country like Uganda where almost the entire population of adults say they don't want military coup. And then you get other places like Mali where a very large number says, yes, we welcome military coups. It's got to do with performance. South Africa, for instance, you get for the first time, support for democracy is a minority opinion in that country. And when we look at it carefully, it almost tracks with the degree to which South Africans perceive corruption at the presidency. So people prefer democracy. If they don't get it, they feel frustrated. They feel that they are being abandoned. And so if you can help prevent, and if the West can help prevent this state of affairs, then it should do so. From this standpoint, it was a big mistake for the West to have de-emphasized democracy and good governance promotion in Africa in favor of the commercial and the security and energy security and stemming extremism. That focus took away much of the vigor and the emphasis that had been placed on democratic governance. But Africans say they want it. Anything you can do to help them to get it, please do, instead and not abandon.
I'm glad to hear that for you. It's a positive message that we have something positive to offer, that we have something which, for example, Russia and China cannot offer. And that's something which we need to be working with. And it also supports the idea of doing both, speaking about values and doing business and trying to strive for prosperity and good deals hand in hand. So I think this was a very important message you just conveyed to us. I'm from Prague, from Czechia. We don't have sea, so for us to travel to Latin America is always something special. But what are the connections? We have a lot of historical and cultural connections where we can find the way how to commonly develop the better world. What can be the narrative which would sound in Latin America?
You want me to do your job? I don't, it's something that I was talking about this morning, and that is valid for practically everybody in the international arena. We understand what is convenient for us, and we don't understand what is not convenient for us. Like children, you tell children, do your homework, he doesn't understand. Go and take your shower, he doesn't understand. You say, go and play football, he understands immediately. Or go and watch TV, and he understands immediately. So you have to find the things that are convenient for us and that can make a connection. Of course, there are things that are important for us. Democracy and human rights values and protections are very important for us. And if we see our hemisphere, maybe the only one, but it works like that. The better our democracy is, the better our security, the better our access to rights, the better our economies. They go together. So that is, human rights, they look like an abstract thing too. When you talk human rights, sometimes it looks empty, but except when they start missing, and we have missed them during the dictatorships in the Southern Cone, and we are missing them already in in the dictators we have in the region. So we have to deal with these things in a way that is easy to understand why it's convenient. And of course, we understand what is convenient when you have, for example, a commercial agreement. But we see, for example, Mercosur have negotiated a commercial agreement with the European Union for, I don't know, 4 decades, and it's still there. So, I mean, it's very difficult to understand that you are close to us when we are not able even to sign something basic. What is the message? The message is you don't value so much. The message is like, oh, you're not so important, maybe. So it's something that you have to be, your words have to be consistent with your actions. And of course, if you have more trade, more investment, more partnership, more cooperation, Latin Americans and Caribbeans will understand that immediately. But if it comes with a lot of trouble in trade, a lot of troubles in cooperation because of middle-income countries, a lot of troubles with climate change, a lot of troubles with issues that can be specifically addressed, then will be very difficult. So a lot of the things have to be reversed in order to make them come on the right track. We understand principles and values, but we have to fill them with the efficiency of our democracies, and we have to. Our democracies have to deliver every 4 or 5 years. They have to face accountability of the people, and if you have not been able to be efficient during those years, you are out. So the speech, the words have to come with some of the basic things that I have referred to.
Okay, thank you. And now I would like to open floor for the question from you, from the audience. But I would like to start with one very special person to have a first remark and question. It's Ivana Klimpuš-Cinsadze. And she's a former deputy prime minister of the Ukrainian government and now the chair of the parliamentary EU integration committee. So we have such a mic. Maybe it's new for you. It can be thrown, so I want to demonstrate it for everyone. So please try to catch it. Yes, yes, like this. Okay. Perfect. And this is the way. And this is the way how it will be sent. It might be, of course, it can be done in a different way, but
make sure that you don't do it too far.
Well, you need to see some raised hand, and that way we will pass the mic. So, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. And I very much appreciate your opening points. And for us, it's extremely important that you. So it doesn't work, right? Just catch it, and then it doesn't work. Okay, so you like this, right?
Maybe it will work later. Let's see.
Okay, well, once again, Minister, I wanted to thank Forum 2000 and you personally for actually placing Ukraine in such a big and important focus here during this conversation. I want to make several comments. We have to remember this war of Russian Federation against Ukraine did not start 1 year and 8 months ago. It started already almost 10 years ago. And that means that we have failed to use all our ability to actually deter it from developing into such a scale war, full-scale war as we are fighting it right now. We are very, very grateful to all the nations that have been helping us over this period of time. But we also understand that we have come probably all together, not necessarily to tiredness, but to getting used that this brutal war is being fought somewhere here in Europe, very close actually from where we are right now, and that this is part of our new normality. And I think that right now we are standing in front of a challenge how to ensure that this plateau of support that we have reached is actually changed to additional increase and to additional impetus for the assistance towards Ukraine. And yes, you are discussing here right now how do we explain this to many other societies in the world. This is incredibly important to explain, but we also have to understand that this is not exclusively about us. If we all fail together to defeat Russia in this war, we are not there yet. We are not there on the same wavelength in understanding that it's not only about Ukraine winning, but it's about Russia being defeated. Then we will provide additional indulgence for not only Russian government, but also to many of those who are watching very attentively whether it's okay to use the power of might in order to attack its neighbor, whether it's okay to forget and just throw it into the bucket the statute of the UN. We have to understand that the consequences of the domino effect in the case of failure of Ukraine winning this war and Russia being defeated are actually going to be drastic for the whole world, not exclusively for Europe. And one more thing that, while explaining to everybody what is going on, we have to remember that only those who can help are capable of actually mobilizing. So part of the world has to be explained and part of the world has to be mobilized. And how do we get to that point? How do we ensure that our societies are not getting used, that this is just another war that is being fought at the backdrop of so many other priorities that are raising with the terrorist attacks on Israel, with other wars that are being maybe prepared, or with other crises and important things that have been mentioned here around this discussion table.
That's quite a clear question. Who would like you to hear the answer?
Well, I think that it would be very important that we heard from ministers, and it would be also important that if we heard from our colleagues from Asia and Africa. I think that is to anybody who wants to pick it up.
Yes, yes.
And where's that thing that I have to...
So that will be a second attempt. Okay, there are raised hands, so maybe...
Don't make it to President Ilves, I won't manage.
So, João, I think the question was clear, how to... it's a question basically which was there, but again, how to make sure.
Yeah, no, this is the challenge, is to explain why this is relevant, why what is happening in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, why this is relevant for international order around the world. And the challenge here is that when Russians talk about new world order, reconstructing the world order, this can actually sound attractive. Of course, the attractive bit is about international social justice, about reforming the international financial institutions. But that's not what Russia has in mind. What Russia has in mind is the right to colonize the former territories of the Soviet Union. But they don't go into that detail. They talk about New World Order. New World Order has aspects that we should be working on more effectively than we are. And I think in the United Nations, now in the General Assembly that happened a few weeks ago, it was more and more clear that there's a major problem with the reasons why we're not achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a major problem with the international financial architecture. We need to be addressing those issues. If we address those issues, we can make it much clearer what is the problem that we need to be addressing with respect to Russia's challenge on international order, because that part of the United Nations Charter, which has to be a fundamental element in any new international order, the charter that we have, there's nothing wrong with it. You can tinker with how many members are in the Security Council, but that charter has to be a fundamental pillar, and that is what Russia is challenging. So we need to be able to get into that, to dive into that discussion about what the world order is, what the world order should aspire to be, and what it needs to, what the aspects that need to be maintained.
Well, that issue is very important for Asian countries as well. Well, of course, because well, we also have a lot of territorial issues, especially with China, and so Asian countries are looking very closely well, on this war. And countries like Japan wants to make sure that Ukraine is going to win. In order to maintain this international order. Basically those relatively newer countries in Asia also emphasizes the importance of sovereignty norms. And so they also are on the side of supporting no violation of territories. And for that, but yet, because they do not want, many of the global South countries in Asia do not want to take sides, and so for Asian major countries, the major task is to sort of mobilize those global South Asian countries to the side of Ukraine, so that Ukraine can win. And here, there's a very, very much complication in a sense that, well, as I said, if we emphasizes too much about the importance of democracy, then it becomes, well, it could potentially look like, you know, antagonistic geopolitical battle of ideology. And so, for example, in the case of G7 Hiroshima summit, which was led by the Japanese government, well, in the statement, they decided not to write too much about democracy. Well, that was apparently in order to, you know, mobilize global support for to, you know, fight against Russia. Instead of emphasizing democracy in the statement, what they did was to emphasize this threat from Russia in the short term, and also the threat from China in a longer term. And that made those Asian developing countries a bit uncomfortable again, because that was talking about China, which is a very important trading country for those developing Asian states. So this, you know, importance of Ukraine's win is, well, very strongly felt in the Asian region. But, you know, how to do it, how to mobilize support for that, especially in a sustainable manner, is requires a lot of political sort of, you know, strategy.
Any comments?
Just a small comment. I think for Africa, much of the situation in Ukraine would be best understood if some of the misinformation and misunderstandings are clarified. Remember that in the 60s, 70s, up to about mid-80s, quite a number of African technocrats today, my generation and slightly below, had gone to universities in the Soviet Union. There, they acquired an understanding of Soviet history, including Crimea and so on. That was very much a communist type of education. They've come back and they still hold on to those views. So 2014, I'm talking to a colleague, a close friend who has studied in Ukraine, in fact, about Crimea. And he said, well, but that has always been part of Russia. And so for him, there was no question. And I believe there are quite a number of educated Africans, technocrats, who hold on to these beliefs and misunderstanding, some of which, of course, has been reinforced by Russia propaganda. That needs to be countered. They need to be educated out of this. Question is, who is providing that explanation? Who is providing that alternative and more correct view of history of those places? I don't see that being done, and I think it's one of the contributions that meetings like this can make, if it can lead to greater and better understanding of the history of these societies leading to the invasion.
I liked the term "fight of ideology." I imagine, you know, the communism versus capitalism, Soviet versus Americans, but democracy has formally won a long time ago in theocracies, in popular front regimes, in kingdoms. They all have elections formally. Even in North Korea, they have elections. So I think it's important that this conference reminds us that we need to be working on the fabric of society, on institutions, on freedom of speech, journalism, to have a plural society. And that's much harder and complicated concept than just to have a democracy on a standard. But there's another question. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister. I address two questions that are very much interlinked, very much related, and I address them to all the members of the panel, including to the moderator. Okay. So the first question relates to the end game. I entirely agree with most of what was already said. We cannot afford, meaning the international values-based order cannot afford that Russia wins this war in Ukraine. But what that means in concrete terms, what is the end game? What really means that Russia is not going to win? And then the day after question. We all know that Ukraine was and is not yet a member of NATO, so it is not protected by NATO deterrence. So we cannot say, honestly, that deterrence failed. It did not fail. Ukraine is not under the protection of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. What failed, in my opinion, was containment. And how to contain Russia after defeating Russia in Ukraine in order to avoid that Russia looks upon other targets. Georgia, it will not be the first time. Moldova, God knows. How to build a strategy that would avoid further adventures from Russia. Thank you very much.
Okay. I take the challenge and I'll try to briefly also provide an answer. For me, the end game is Ukraine able to keep its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and any kind of peace, just peace, needs to be with the full agreement of Ukrainian society and political elites. Anything else which would be forced on Ukraine would immediately lead to constant, perpetual Ukraine domestic crisis, and it would spoil Europe for decades. Because it would not solve the conflict, it would just change the nature of the conflict. And this is something which I am always vocal when I speak with my European and American friends and try to explain them. It is not just us being nice to helping Ukraine. It is our very vital interest that we will solve the issue in a correct way. And I think everyone who sees how Ukraine is valiantly fighting much stronger enemy, it's giving us the clear example that they really want to have a word in a solution of that. Day after, of course, it's a very complicated question, but I will provide one anecdote. This Friday, I had a dinner with one very prominent figure leading one of the leaders of the Russian opposition living abroad. And we spent the dinner discussing if that is a civil war in Ukraine or not. And it was a figure of the Russian opposition, very, very well-known person. So we should create such a strategy which even after Putin, even after this regime will still be containing Russian imperialism, which I do not foresee that Russia would go through any significant change, because I don't see that there would be some kind of defeat which could bring, which could brought that change to Russia. And definitely we are not seeking to that happen in a nuclear superpower. So we need to be very realistic in that. But we have a very good question. What is the end game? How the day after will look like? And I leave the floor open.
The first turn, so I take the second one first. It is very important that Ukraine wins, not only that Russia is defeated. It is very important. If not, it would be the world upside down, and it will be a change in the international way that we communicate what is wrong, what is right. And if actions like the Russian aggression, like the crime of aggression, is validated by a victory, if human rights violations by Russians are validated by a victory of Russia, it cannot be held in the near future it will be hard for everyone, everywhere in the world. Everywhere where you have authoritarianism. And we see, for example, Venezuela going for a referendum about the Essequibo. That is, sounds familiar, no? It is something that we need to remove from the equation. So it is very necessary not only that Russia is defeated, but that Ukraine wins and that justice will be done afterward. And those that have committed the crime of aggression will be judged. And those that they have committed human rights violations will be judged. And that the world will be able to go on with democracy and a way of resolving controversies in a peaceful way. If we accept, if Russia wins, then a lot of countries and authoritarian regimes around will find that this is a way of moving forward solutions, and that it's not possible. It's already a world where everything seems to be valid or validated, as I said. Every kind of aggression, in Armenia or in Israel or in Ukraine. We cannot accept that. We have to reverse that. And for that, the Ukrainian victory is an imperative. And that is something that we have to push forward. And we are we should be very proud of the courage that the Ukrainian people have showed, because they have carried on this struggle mainly alone, with some support, but this support is in other resources. But those on the ground are Ukrainians, and they are fighting for a war for everybody in the world.
Strong words.
If I may. Well, there was this discussion on the importance of containing Russia, and well, I would also sort of like to raise a flag that this is something that we have to be careful in discursive space, because you know, whatever antagonistic sort of approach, if we look like taking, could potentially cause a backlash from potential partners for the West. I mean, well, you know, those campaign slogans which sounds very strong against Russia, against China, or against those authoritarian powers, could be very effective in a short-term period. But well, you know, this you know, Ukraine, Russian attack against Ukraine is happening in the European soil, but this is a large-scale war which has an impact onto the international society as a whole, and we should not think about the discourse within Europe alone. We have to really think about how those you know, non-European countries would react, would think about the discourse that we have been having. So for that sake, I really think you know, we actually have to think harder as to how to maintain pro-rights discourse. Although you know, democracy might actually push those global South countries further, but we really have to hold tight with these pro-rights arguments. And well, you raised a really wonderful point, important points of the fact that those authoritarian countries are even using elections. And that's indeed one of the most important issues that we have. Well, which is that, you know, those elections in those authoritarian countries are fabricated, or they use staffed voting. They actually disband, you know, opposition parties before elections, or they even, you know, will close down journalists, you know, media, in order to, you know, maintain lack of accountability. But this actually distorts the idea of free, fair, and regular elections. And the same thing is happening with China and Russia's massive attempts of distorting other type of liberal norms, like, you know, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And so we have to make sure that even if we are not to underscore the importance of democracy itself, but we still have to talk about how it is important for the people to maintain freedom, to maintain the rule of law in order to maintain the international order. And that sort of somewhat broken down conceptions than democracy might actually resonate better with non-Western countries.
Very nicely put it. I would subscribe that. We have last 7 minutes, so I propose to have 1, 2, 3 quick questions and then wrap it up. Please ask.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Katya Dekanoidze. I'm from Georgia, member of the parliament. So I have to really underline that everything started in Georgia 2008. Nobody mentioned it here, but in 2008, Russia made the full-scale aggression to my country, and 25% of my country is still occupied under Russian aggression. And I have to agree to my friend Ivanka, who is sitting here, that the best containment for Russia is to really just sending the signal to Russia that yes, the European civilization or Western civilization can really accept Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine into their family, to the club. So, but here is a problem also, that we're talking about the war fatigue. But can we ask the Ukrainian soldiers on the front line what is war fatigue? They have to fight it everyday life. But also we have to contradict the populistic regimes and the governments, especially in Europe, who really talk to their people that to help Ukraine is charity. And that to help Ukraine is not charity. To help Ukraine is to battle and to fight for our own freedom. So my question to you, probably all of you, and the minister to you, will be how we have to really contradict this populistic approach that helping Ukraine, helping Georgia, or just, helping all countries against Russia is charity, and it's not the real choice of the civilization. Thank you.
I think the question was very clear. Thank you.
I can.
Throw it. Yes.
Hi, Benjamin Tallis, German Council on Foreign Relations. This war has the potential to be a system-transforming war. The question is, what is the transformation we want? I think we spend too much time talking about defending the order we have, defending the rules-based order. We have to be honest and recognize this order has not been sufficient. It has not been sufficient to make a world safe for democracy. It's an order that many around the world consider to be rigged. So what is that transformation that we want to see to make a more inclusive order, but not one where anything goes, one that is actually genuinely a safe order for free societies? And I'd love to hear from the panelists, what is the one change they would like to make to our institutions, our rules, or the spirit of that order to make that happen? Thank you.
Very good question. One change. Yes.
Thomas Ilves, former president of Estonia. I have a particular question for the representative from Africa. I've heard for many, many times that the reason why Africa is so lukewarm on the Ukrainian invasion is because of the perceived hypocrisy toward refugees, which, frankly, coming from an East European country, almost bordering Ukraine, and this is also true of Poland and Hungary and Slovakia and the Czech Republic, all of which have minorities from Ukraine. What are you talking about? We don't take in our neighbors? And that as a justification for not taking a position on aggression, with the exception of Kenya. I would hate to be. I would hate to be that.
And Ghana.
I would hate to be an invaded country and then and face the same problem.
Okay, that was more than a remark. So let's make it quick and efficient. One change to the world order, and how to contradict populism in regard of war in Ukraine, maybe other wars.
Well, I think with respect to the current world order and what we would need to change about it, we do honestly need to address inconsistencies. There have been very significant inconsistencies in various issues. What's happening now in the Middle East is going to raise a whole lot of questions with respect to inconsistencies. We need to be taking much more seriously the accusations of double standards. Not all of them are correct, but at least listening to them, going through them seriously, and looking at what ways they challenge the kind of order that we really ideally should be aspiring to. If we use the John Rawls concept of the veil of ignorance and imagine that we don't know in which country we are, what kind of approach would be correct, I think that we need to have a serious engagement with that. And that, I think, partly would also go to the question wasn't addressed to me, but I think it's all of the panel is interested in this point of why in Africa there is this sense of inequity with respect to taking in refugees. It's quite simple. There have been brutal wars in Africa, massive influxes of civil wars and other wars, interstate wars, which barely make the pages of our newspapers and yet send hundreds of thousands of people moving across the continent, in many cases trying to cross the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean is closed down and it's becoming a cemetery. This is something that, of course, Africans feel, and they becomes very, very sensitive when compared to the generosity, which I can only applaud wholeheartedly with respect to Ukrainian refugees.
Thank you.
Well, I think one thing I would like to add is that, because of the time, is that those democratic countries in Asia are also trying to support Ukraine or whatever democracy side that is under attack. And so, for example, in the case of the Japanese government, they have been receiving refugees from Ukraine, in the number of over 2,000, and they have been sending materials for defensive purposes, financial support, food support, and so forth. But what lacks right now, I think, in overall Asia, is 1.5 track approach. Because many of the Asian countries, Asian governments do not want to stand out in its sort of support for Ukraine or in its sanction against Russia. Well, in the case of Japan, Japan actually sanctions Russia, but many other Asian developing countries, especially, do not want to stand out in that. And yet, they are also keen about this, problem of refugees and so forth, whether it's actually Ukraine or other places. And there have been a lot of NGO people or scholars in the region who have been actually hosting those democracy advocates everywhere, including from Ukraine. And so I think in order to make this sort of quiet approach to support democracy or Ukraine, we should have better coordination between the civil society and government, which actually is one of the things that Asian society is the weakest. So we will have to think harder.
Thank you.
Well, first, a point of correction. There were, I believe, about 8 to 7 or 7 African countries that voted in support of Ukraine at the UN, though a majority abstained, and then a few, mainly authoritarian, autocratic-led countries voted with Russia. So I think that should be asserted. But in addition to that, it will be a big mistake to conflate the votes of an African government or president or UN representative on Ukraine with that of the people. And I say this because we have new data from the Afrobarometer. We asked South Africans at the beginning of this year to tell us whether they think the influence of Russia on their country in economic and political terms was positive or negative. Roughly 25%, a quarter of adults said the influence is positive, but almost the same percentage said the influence was negative. A majority had no clue. So when President Ramaphosa or ANC is taking a position in favor of Russia and against Ukraine or against the West, it would be a mistake to see that as the vote of South Africans on the whole. It's important to make this distinction so you avoid punishing citizens for what their governments do or don't do.
Thank you. Last remarks, and then we finish.
First of all, it is true, all started in Georgia 2008, then continued in Ukraine 2014. But it seems never anybody felt threatened by those actions. And they were a problem, they were a concern, they were condemned, there were preoccupations, but it was not that they needed to engage. And, but going for the whole of Ukraine, of course, was bringing some imbalance in everything. And how to reverse the charity approach. I think the approach of everybody will go on like this for quite a while, just providing resources and what materially need Ukrainians to fight the war. And so far, it seems we are all ready to fight Russia till the last Ukrainian soldier, and that seems to be the approach. But how we move beyond that, and that is the issue. Without bringing the whole temple on everybody, and that is a challenge. And so I think we are facing a situation where we are in that kind of charity. The Western Hemisphere will keep providing for Ukrainians to fight the war, but that will not change in the near future. And maybe it's completely wrong, but yeah, definitely. But we have to understand Ukraine needs to win the war, as I said in the previous question. And how to reverse, how to make the international order better, just a couple of ideas. Of course, first of all, financial institutions, they have to completely work differently. I mean, when you are anywhere, I mean, the money doesn't arrive in enough and not in time. So most of our countries, they are facing a lot of challenges related to how to deal with financial institutions and how to get enough money at the right time and for what. Second, and of course, middle-income countries, issues, climate change issues. For example, we have in the hemisphere one serious problem with that. We are the first border, and every year I have a couple of the countries of the jurisdiction of the Organization of American States completely devastated, and that's it, and they have to rebuild. And it's different when you have a big country and it's okay, you have a small part there, you can reassign resources. But when you are completely devastated, what do you do? And for something that you have never created, that you have not put a single input there to have the situation that we have. Adaptation too. We are paying for adaptation. For example, Argentina lost 20% of their agricultural GDP in a drought. Uruguay, the same. Who paid for that? Uruguayans and Argentinians. So that's it. And that is the international order that we have. The situations created by others, we paid, the poor pay for that. That is completely unacceptable, upside down. So we have a lot of things to change. And of course, we see in the international arena, for example, now, what the organization that needs to provide security cannot act in Ukraine because they have a veto there. I mean, what is that? I mean, that it cannot go on like that forever. Some basic things.
Thank you very much. Thank you for great debate. We spent across the whole globe, and I hope it was big inspiration. Thank you.